I thought that Sybok was the best non-villain that could ever imagine in that series. Here suddenly is a heroic fella who wants to take everyone's pain, who wants social justice in his own way, and then makes this big mistake of stealing the Enterprise and getting into trouble with all these troublesome people, trying to make Sybok deal with his own pacifism in terms of the weapons and all of that and the fighting and all that stuff, because that's not what he was there for. He was there to save people. And also, maintaining the character of a half Vulcan, half human. That was interesting. I'm Larry Luckinbill. I played Sybok in Star Trek V, and now I'm on Trek Untold, and I'm loving it.
Welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. And welcome back to Season 5 of Trek Untold. I cannot believe we are here now in the 5th season of this show. At least that's what I'm calling this now, because we are currently marching towards episode 200, and it's kind of surreal for me to even think about that already, because this show started as a pandemic project back in really mid-2020. The idea kind of existed in my head before then, but didn't really get off the ground until the pandemic, which is when so many creative things got started. And that would be this podcast for me. And now here in the 5th season, I have to reflect for a moment and just think about all the folks I've spoken to, all the opportunities that I've had because of this show. And all of that has been made possible because of folks like you. People like you who have listened to this podcast on iTunes, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and all the other different audio platforms out there, or the others who have watched this show on YouTube and really helped it grow. Thanks to your support, thanks to all of your views and all your listens and your downloads, this show has continued to move forward at warp speed, and I'm so excited now to continue this series with a whole new batch of guests. And I can't think of a better way to start this than with a real serious deep dive with a true living legend among performers. And the actor who we're speaking with today is one who played a character who is mired in some controversy and a whole lot of interest. So much so that they are bringing back this character now in Strange New Worlds. Laurence Luckinbill played Sybok in Star Trek V, the 5th motion picture of the franchise, a character who we had never ever heard about before. And sure, that makes sense for a movie. Of course, they always introduce new characters, but this was a character who was Spock's brother, who was never mentioned once during the entire 3 seasons of the original run or the 4 previous movies. Needless to say, that's a pretty big deal. It's kind of a large memory gap there, huh, Spock? What about that? But despite that, Sybok left a heck of a mark on the Star Trek universe and left fans asking a lot more questions, and we're still waiting for those answers, which, hey, we might get, like I mentioned, in Strange New Worlds coming soon. But the actor who donned those Vulcan years, Laurence Luckinbill, has decades upon decades of interesting stories to tell and a whole lot of experiences. And we've conducted this interview here with him just months away from hitting 90 years old. That's a heck of a milestone to hit. And that's perfect timing as well, because Laurence, or Larry as he lets me call him during this chat, has just released his newest autobiography, which is titled Effective Memories: How Chance and Theater Saved My Life. This book, which was just released by Sunbury Press, is a huge archive of the many, many decades of those experiences that we just talked about here. And, I will say, if you guys look at his IMDb page, you'll see a few dozen upon dozens of things out there, but truly, it was the theater where Larry lived and thrived in. And this book goes into so much detail about that, as well as so many stories beyond his world on stage and screen. And there's a ton of professional and personal stories in here, and some of those I couldn't believe that he was willing to tell and put out there in public. So this interview, to me, feels like the perfect companion piece for that book. So the way I viewed it was I read the book before I had a talk with Larry here, and I was able to kind of fill in a lot of the gaps I didn't quite get from the book. So truly, I, number one, recommend you get that book, and number two, recommend you really dig into this chat here, because there are no stones unturned in this interview. So we are talking about Sybok in Star Trek V and his many experiences with that character, as well as some of the other work he's done on TV, a ton of his theater work, And more importantly, to me at least, the role that really kind of cemented him as a mainstay of the New York theatrical scene back in the late 60s and early 70s. And that show was the LGBTQ milestone play, The Boys in the Band. Now, this is a show I had heard about. I've heard it in passing time and time again, but I never had a chance to actually watch it because, of course, I wasn't around when it came out. But there is a movie which Larry and all the actors who were in the show also got to do. And as you'll learn in the book, and as Larry will explain here, this was a true milestone thing because this play came out in 1969 when the LGBTQ scene was very different from what it was today and very much shrouded in secrecy and not really allowed to be out in public in any way. And this movie blew people's minds. And Larry lived this role nonstop for several years, so he's got quite a connection to this character and so many stories about him. And to me, one of the best things about this interview was the fact that Larry still had all these stories within him. And that goes for the boys in the band, for the other roles that we're going to talk about today, whether it's on stage or on screen, and even for Sybok. At nearly 90 years old, Larry answered every single question I had with such great intensity and intelligence that really, again, as I said, no stone was left unturned. That's because this was the deepest dive we could have possibly gone. And I'm confident in saying that there are no other interviews out there on the internet that went as deep as we did with Larry today. We're also going to be covering some of his one-man shows, which you can find on Larry's YouTube page, because yes, at nearly 90 years old, Larry has a YouTube channel. And there you can find productions of what I'm essentially calling his Great American series, where you'll see single-man stage shows all about greats like Ernest Hemingway and Clarence Darrow and several others. So it's absolutely worth checking out his channel once you finish this episode. But really, I can keep giving him all the accolades I want here, but that's not going to really make a big difference because he's already earned them all. So rather than me just talking about all of his accolades and accomplishments for the next 10 minutes or so here, why don't we go ahead and get into the interview and have Larry tell you all about them himself. But before we get into today's interview, I want to ask you guys, are you following Trek Untold on social media? If you're not, you can go ahead and follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and heck, even on TikTok, all at Trek Untold. That's one word, no spaces, no hyphens. The only space in Trek Untold is the cosmos around us. If you're in a position to help financially support Trek Untold, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/Trek Untold. For as little as $1 a month, you can help support this show financially, keep us going at warp speed all the way through. And joining at higher benefit levels will give you additional perks, including advanced access to episodes, the ability to ask some of my guest questions, and a whole bunch of other things. Make sure you subscribe to this show, whether that's on the audio platform of your choosing or on YouTube, where the video version of this show lives. And speaking of, make sure to check out our YouTube channel more frequently for episodes of our new mini show, Tales from Trek Untold, as well as other sci-fi goodies. And of course, don't forget to leave ratings, reviews, comments, and whatever you can do no matter what platform you're on to enjoy this podcast and show others that you're digging it too. Links to all these things and more will be in the show notes, including my Amazon storefront where you can pick up any Star Trek or sci-fi related merchandise for me or other things out there, and anything else that I'm working on these days, because who knows what the heck I'm doing these days. But all that information will be found in the show notes for this week's episode. With all that said and done now, let's get this week's episode started up. Computer, access interview file. Today's guest has played kings, lawyers, presidents, but to Trekkies, he helped us answer the question of what does God need with a starship? We are joined today by the living legend. I'm truly honored to be in your presence today, Mr. Laurence Luckinbill.
Thank you, Matt.
This is wonderful to be here with you. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of parts of your career, not just Star Trek. Now, your daughter was kind enough to help set up this interview, and I told her, typically in this podcast, if we spend 20 minutes talking about Star Trek, that's a lot because you've got 89 years of things to talk about. So we're going to be doing a lot today.
Yeah. But I have to say, I loved the movie I did, and I love the story, and we'll get started with that, Yeah,
well, I do want to mention, first things first, we had to mention your new book, your new autobiography, Effective Memories, How Chance and the Theater Saved My Life. And number one, I just want to compliment you on how beautifully written this book is. For this podcast and for other things, I read a lot of autobiographies, and yours was just written in such a illustrative way. And as you put it, parts of it are mythologized, but true. And I really love how you said that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really, really great book. So number one, I just recommend everybody read it. But for you, Mr. Luckinbill, how does one write an autobiography with nearly 9 decades of life experiences at your fingertips?
Because my daughter told me to.
Fair enough.
Yes. I opened the book with a sequence where I'm telling stories to my 5 children, and they're in a little a house in Westchester that we had in a cramped space in the former kitchen, and they're townies and they're scared because it's nighttime in the woods, and I tell them the story, and it calms them down, and when the shadows go by the windows and the wind blows and the house creaks and all of that. So at the end of the story, I say, my daughter was the one who kept saying, "What's next, Daddy?"
Mm.
And "What's Next, Daddy" became the book. And it took 10 years, and it actually changed my life enormously. And I dug out things from my own experience that I had no idea that I had experienced, just like most of us do.
Mm.
I had a tough growing up in a dysfunctional family. And my daughter then, on reading the book, she said, "Oh my God, Dad, I had no idea what you went through." So, and I think most kids about with their parents might be able to say the same thing. I had no idea what they went through.
It's truly tremendous, all the different events that have happened to you, and we're going to discuss some of them today. But for real, that book is just amazing. But I want to ask you, since you kind of mentioned it a little bit here, there's a lot of stuff that you didn't even necessarily remember happened to you. Was it difficult to relive and have to write about some of these tougher moments throughout your life?
It was very hard to relive, and I cried a lot, and I pondered a lot, and I thought a lot, and I revised a lot, not to change the text of it, because I knew what the truth was, and I told that. But the revisions were to make it easier to read, and the tone of the thing turned out to be sort of semi-poetic, which I think is the way I see life.
That's a great way to put it. It is a very poetic kind of book. But, again, reading it, all these things that have happened to you, I'm thinking about my own life and things I've gone through. I can't imagine the experiences that you've had yourself, but just getting a taste of it. I think back to my own experiences, and I remember bad things that happened to me or bad things I did to people.
Yes.
Do you find that you're able to forgive yourself now? Or how do you look at those things at your age today from where they were 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago?
Yes. The actual writing of the book was a long atonement and a long reconciliation with not only the people that I ditched along the way because I couldn't take what they were giving me back, to the people that I actually harmed in other ways. And as you know, if you read it, and there was at the end a sense of peace that I have now that I've never had in my life before.
Mm.
And it came coincident with moving to Palm Springs, although that was not the whole issue. The issue was it was happening to me, and my wife and I went through stuff, and all of that has become none of it's in the past. It's all in my memory every day, and yet there's a very different feeling when you can forgive. During the writing of the book, I came across a book that somebody recommended to me called what's it called? Radical Forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hard to read because it is hard to do. Radical forgiveness. You have to forgive everybody for everything, and then you forgive yourself. And that's the hardest thing to do, as you may know. When you're capable of doing that for real, things change.
Mm. I mean, it must be difficult because you don't want to be an untrustworthy narrator in your own life story, but you have to confront these horrible things.
Yes, I lied all the way to the bank.
Yes, well, there you go.
Man, that would be absolute shit, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah,
Married.
Well, Laurence, Mr. Luckinbill, let's dive into things now. And again,
call me Larry.
Larry. Thank you. All right, thank you, Larry. So, again, I already read the book, so I know the answer to some of these questions, but the rest of my audience, they don't know some of these things yet.
Well, you're like a prosecutor. You know the answers before you ask.
Gotta know. Gotta do your homework, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, Larry, the first question I ask all my guests, and that's, where were you born? What did your parents do for a living? And what did little Larry want to be when he grew up?
Okay. My parents, I grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, which is on the edge of the Ozarks, and then we moved to the Ozarks, and we're there for quite a while. The upper part of Arkansas, below the Missouri border, and it's hillbillies and all that. And Fort Smith was a kind of a town that was still in the Reconstruction era, and with Jim Crow and all of that stuff. And Oklahoma was right across the river, the Arkansas River, which in my latter life I've tried to trace. And it starts, rises in Colorado, comes down as a beautiful, beautiful river all the way to the Mississippi. It's a fantastic river, and I grew up on the edge of it. And my parents, my dad was born in Oklahoma. His father was a very, very mean alcoholic, and he was the town undertaker and hardware merchant. And I'm sure he beat up on all of his children. He had 6 children, 5 boys and 1 girl, and they were not happy people. And my mother was born, I believe, in Fort Smith, and she was an Arkansawyer, and they met at a Knights of Columbus dance, and he had a reputation as a bootlegger, and so people were like, I guess the girls kind of were looking at that like, woo, and he was tall and handsome, and really good dancer, and so was my mother. They danced together all that night, and that was it for them. They fell in love, and they got married in 1926. They went to St. Louis, first big town, first hotel that they ever stayed in. They were both virgins, and that will tell you what things were like in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And I have 3. There were 4 of us. My older sister, 5 years older than me to the day, and I had admired my older sister, and I was just her acolyte. She could dance, she could sing, she could pull taffy. She got me out of my nerdness and my bookiness. I was a bookworm from day one. And then my younger sister, who was the mother of the Matrix fellas, the Wachowski brothers, who are now the Wachowski sisters. That'll tell you something about the 1980s and 90s. And my brother, who was a marine biologist. So we all came out through all the dysfunction. The dysfunction was caused by my father, who was a drunk. And he was just a drunk. And he was also a kind man and a smart man, and not a stupid fool. But when he drank, and my mother ragged on him, he got violent. And I could read a scene that would tell you that, but maybe I'll write it. I'll read something a little bit less troublesome for the folks. But anyway, so I grew up in that atmosphere. Fear. It was fear all day long, all the time. We never could have friends to the house because that would mess up with Daddy, and Daddy would be drunk. And all of the holidays were the same. So I was not a celebrator until I met my wife, Lucy, who celebrates everything. And that was a big change for me too. It's I'll get to talking about her later. But I left Arkansas at 19, and I went to Fayetteville for the University of Arkansas. And Fayetteville is a blue island in a green sea, and was then and still is.
Good way to put it.
Yeah, and it just coincided with the fact that I got there, and it's such a wonderful story because I have to side trip here and say that during high school I was a slacker. I was a poseur, and I was also the class clown. And I wasn't doing well in any of my subjects, but I was very, very smart. And the two nuns at the school at St. Anne's Academy knew this, and they got together with my mother, and they conspired to get me out of high school in 3 years. And I knew nothing of this. I'm just following along and being, but my English teacher changed my life when I was taking summer school every year. And if I'm going on too long, you tell me. And she gave me some poem. I don't know, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, somebody to recite in the class, and I slacked on it, and I was trying to be popular with my other slacker buddies, the guys that were always in the front row because
oh yeah, the troublemakers.
Yeah, that's right, and I made the guys laugh with my parody of some poem. And this nun, Sister Matthew, walked down the aisle calmly to me, Irish woman, and from the old country. And she gave me a right cross that knocked me out of my chair. And I was on the floor and I was laughing, and they were laughing. And I looked up at her, and she was very serious. And there was a twinkle in her eye. And she said, "Don't laugh at the words of poets. Poets are important. Words are important. If you don't know how to communicate, you don't amount to much." Mm. She turned around and went back to her station. And she became, I would say, my best friend in that for years and years. And that changed me. So the whole process of becoming an actor was, I had no idea what I wanted to do or be. You say, what did you want to be? I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player and play for the Cardinals and be in center field with Stan Musial. Like all kids.
Yeah. Because I know you went through basically a period where you thought you wanted to be a doctor, maybe, and then you were thinking military, which you did ultimately spend some time in. So
no, I never wanted to be a doctor, but my mother wanted.
Yes.
Dr. Luckinbill will visit you. We'll see you now, and me and my little thing hanging over my neck,
stethoscope.
And so I tried to make that happen, but I failed spectacularly. Every course, every time. For 2 years, D's and F's. And then again, I had a wonderful professor in organic chemistry who, after he flunked me totally in the second time. And when I read the grades, I knew I was sunk. I could not be a doctor. So I ran across the campus and I banged on his door, and this was a man who had testified at the Nuremberg trials about Zyklon B. And I admired him enormously. He was playing the piano, some etude. I interrupted him. He opened the door and he said, "Come in." And I thought, I started to blubber, and it crossed my mind that I was being Oliver Twist. So I wiped my nose with my sleeve and came in and sat on the piano, on the chair in front of me. He sat on the piano bench, and he said, "You have entertained us royally this last 2 years." He said, "You don't know it, but I've got eyes in the back of my head, and your invitation to me is very good. And it's given me ideas about what I should change about being a teacher." But he said, "I'm going to tell you something you're not going to like, and that is that you don't belong in the sciences. You belong in the performing arts." Well, Matt, that was such a shock to me. I was desperate now. You've read the book, you know what I did after that. But I knew I had to face my mother. And so I did. And by then, they moved to California. They were Archies, Latter-day Archies. So from there, I was kind of dragooned into the idea that I could be in the performing arts. And then I realized, as the class clown that I had been, that maybe I should try to be an actor. And so I did. And the long, long, long process of trying to become a good actor, and then even better than a good actor, has taken me 63 years. And I never quit on it. And I wanted to quit lots of times because being an actor, I used to tell people, was being like an unemployed man who once in a while has extreme anxiety because he's got a job. Anyway, that's the wrap up of the whole smear there.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of keep pursuing this for a bit here. I want to talk about now that, at this point in your life, you are looking into becoming an actor, right? And your first teacher was Dr. K, George Kernodle.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear a little bit more about him, because again, this is the person that's now helping you take those formative first steps into this world. What would you say is the greatest lesson you ever received from Dr. K?
Go big. Be fearless. He was a fearless man. All of us Archies in the room tried to deal with Shakespeare and Sophocles and the others because it was a classical education they were giving us. All of us had these little concepts of what being an actor was, mostly gathered from the movies. I had never seen a play in my life, and I'd seen some movies, and so for this man to reveal to us that the first thing that you have to do is attack it in a big way. Shall I read you something?
Sure. Let's hear a page from the book. Sure.
Yeah. This is a little tiny bit at the beginning of the book that will give you an idea of where I was coming from and what my real self and my ambition felt like. Home. I believed I could fly and decided to try. I climbed as high as I dared and looked down. The ground was pretty far away. I looked out past the wet, weedy grass, the patches of bare ground, to the chicken coop holding up the leaning barn, and over the broken fence to the alley, the green and shadowed place, no man's land. I would fly that far. My little sister, Lynn, looked up at me. She looked scared. Did I? No, I knew I could fly. I checked to see if my cape was ready to flare out behind me when I soared across the yard. I wanted that effect. I would not go high. This was a test flight. I stuck out an arm, pointing in the direction of my flight. That would help me level off in a horizontal position. I took a breath. I stepped out into the air, and I fell straight down. I hit the soft summer earth with one foot in front of the other. It was the pose I wanted, but the pain of the landing spoiled it. I sprained my ankle so badly I had to walk with a stick for a week. My sister, as always, was sympathetic. She didn't laugh. Neither did I. I was mad. I undid the safety pins holding the threadbare towel to the collar of my too large T-shirt. My cape hadn't performed as expected. A design problem. I had failed. But what was one failure? What about the Wright brothers? I knew I would try again, like them. Never mind I didn't have an airplane. I had a strange power. I needed to fly. I had to. I was 9 years old. My sister was 5. I had just jumped off the back porch of our little house and dropped about 7 feet to the ground. Some flight, some might say. But it was the first of many tries to fly in many ways all my life. I'm 89 years old now. My sister, if only she were still here, would be 84. Before she left, I asked her if she remembered the event that summer day. She said yes, and I thought you were crazy and brave. I admired you. And I thought, if he could do it, so can I. Here's what I know now. If you have to do something you really believe in, do it. Even when it hurts. Just be sure you're the only one it hurts. And you can't know just by the act of trying, you might inspire someone, even be a mentor.
And that's scene 1, act 1 from Larry's book, Effective
Yes.
Memories. I know it well.
Yes. And that kind of sums it up, in a way, because acting is flying. When I was living in New York and had married Lucy, we had a wonderful office, and I posted a photograph from the sports section of the New York Times on my wall. It was an inspiration to me. It was the third baseman. I don't remember this guy's name, but he was a really hot third baseman of that era in the 1980s. And the photograph showed him in full flight, 6 feet off the ground, level, his glove reaching as far as he could reach, his eye on the ball, which the photograph captured. He was looking at the ball, not the ground, nothing about it. He was flying. And I wrote on the page, acting. This is acting, which is how I still feel about it today.
You talk about in the book many of your inspirations, and one of them is, Gene Kelly, and there's all sorts of acting inspirations, Charles Lawton. But the one that sticks out and that really fits in what you just read for the beginning of your book is Captain Marvel. Because you said early on as a child, you wanted to be Captain Marvel. Today, my generation knows him as Shazam. Back then, he was Captain Marvel. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy because, you have all these amazing performers who you idolize, but then there's still this superhero. It's on the pedestal. And I feel like reading the book, it's kind of like, to you, that was seeing the impossible done. And that's what you wanted to do, is you wanted to do the impossible, something you felt as a kid growing up in the Ozarks that you couldn't actually do.
Yes. And you can leap to that with a jump cut all the way to Star Trek.
Yes, we could, but I'm not there yet, Larry. I got more for you still, but yeah, we will definitely come back to that, because I actually did want to, again, you've got so much acting knowledge. I want to pick your brain a little bit here. And there's another quote I want to pull from the book. And this one came from another mentor, which was Uta Hagen. And we've talked about Uta on this podcast with many other guests.
It's a funny scene, yeah.
And so the quote I have is something that Uta had said, and that's, "You are extraordinary. You have the technique. Now you have to find yourself. Put yourself in the scene. You, ordinary, you, be there." And again, people, if they want to get the whole setup, buy the book. But for at least for this quote here, Larry, can you kind of talk to us about what this actually means and how it pertains to performing?
To be yourself?
Yeah. How do you actually do that in a scene? Because you're not yourself in a scene, but you still have to, according to this quote, find it.
Correct. It's a combination of things. Stanislavski invented the term effective memories, which are the memories of your life, which you can use to analogize into the character that you're playing. It comes from your life, but it has to match up with the character that you're playing. Sometimes they don't match up, so you have to find some other way to get into that. But let's say Macbeth, which was the issue with Uta. How do I do this? The girl said. And I played Macbeth, actually, and so at age about 25. And how do you become that guy? And I knew that I had things in my life that were, what shall I say? Macbeth, I imagined, felt like nobody because the king was somebody. And Macbeth gradually was led to, by his wife and his needs, his emotions, to want to kill the king, to become the king. And so I can take that to the most extreme part of myself and say, what would I do to become a star? The star in our lives. And So those kind of memories that you can use are what actually are you in the character.
And this now leads me into what I wanted to talk to you about in terms of your Great American series. So, folks who know the theater world, they are familiar with your performances as Teddy Roosevelt, as Lyndon B. Johnson, as Ernest Hemingway, as Clarence Darrow. And so we talk about those. And by the way, for folks who want to see them, many of those performances are on Larry's YouTube channel. So we're going to have a link to that so everybody can watch those. And I recommend it.
What we're going to do is, you're the first to know, we have decided to put them in audio. So there'll be in audiobooks.
Oh, great. That's perfect. That's
Yeah.
actually brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I bring it up because this was one of the things I feel like that you were known for was your solo plays. And I'm curious, what part of Larry Luckinbill was in each of those very different people?
Well, of course, I thought when I was offered Lyndon, which was the first one, that I was nothing like him. And in many ways, I wasn't and aren't and can't be. But I did find in Lyndon a sense of the civic dream of making the country the perfect union that it's supposed to be. And people didn't think that about Lyndon. They thought he was a Southern Pole, and like I did in the beginning, and a bullshit artist and all of that stuff. But when it came down to it, Lyndon adored Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt gave him his chance, and giving a man like that his chance was all that Lyndon needed, because he was extremely ambitious, but in a way that was to make the country better. And when he was supposed to, he decided to run for Congress in Texas, and he told his mother, "I'm going to make a speech at the Capitol steps that'll just knock their faces off." And she said, "No, you're not." He said, "What?" She said, "Your first speech is going to be right here on the front porch to your neighbors." And he said, "You're so right." And that was his abiding dream, was to help his neighbors. That was Lyndon. I was able to use those thoughts that I had. Then Clarence Darrow fit exactly who I am, which is a man who wanted social justice in the world and didn't know it. I found it out by all of the things that I saw and that were happening. Without getting into this, our country is in a cataclysm right now. It's right at the edge of some earthquake of some kind, and that's been a long time coming. And it's the issue of it is racism. That's the basic issue. Anyway, so Clarence Darrow, I just loved, because every word he said was about that. And yet, I mean, he wanted no child labor. He wanted women's rights. He wanted all kinds of things that we now look to. Darrow was also a flawed man. They were, all four of them were flawed. They all had their issues. They all had their panderings. And yet they had the greatness of wanting social justice for this country. Same thing for Teddy. Teddy Roosevelt was so admirable in the things that he said and jumped in with both feet and did when he was president. And then toward the end of his life, the basis of my play about him is not about all his fabulous things, although those are in there, but I didn't want a list of that stuff. I found the key to Teddy Roosevelt was the loss of his youngest son, Quentin, in 1918, when Quentin attacked a squadron of the Red Barons people, and in 30 seconds was shot down. And Eleanor, who's Teddy's cousin, was in Paris, and she got the word that maybe some other pilots thought that he had landed safely because those airplanes didn't just crash the way they did today. Had more buoyancy, but it wasn't true. And the Germans buried him basically on the line between Germany and France.
Mm.
And this broke Teddy's heart, and he died 5 months later of congestive heart failure. And Hemingway was the guy that I put out of my mind. I read everything he wrote as a 14-year-old, and because I wanted to be like Hemingway, macho and have a code and do those things, bullfighting, all that stuff. And then he killed himself. And I thought, as a Catholic boy, I said, well, that's it for him. He's in hell. Goodbye. And so that also tells you where I'm coming from. A long time religious boy that I was able to put somebody out of my life because they had done something that I thought was bad, evil, sinful. And all that stuff worked on me. And when I wrote the Hemingway play, it was after I found out that the reason he killed himself was the fact that he had about 80 shock treatments, which kills your short-term memory. And he was a Nobel Prize winner with no short-term memory. And when the Kennedy people asked him to write one sentence for a commemorative thing for John, he couldn't do it. And right after that, he killed himself. And so I wrote a 90-minute play, which is 2 minutes, the last 2 minutes of his life, as he gets up from bed, goes down to the cellar, opens the gun cabinet with the key that his wife was supposed to hide but didn't, picks out his favorite shotgun, goes across the living room to the foyer, shuts the foyer door, kneels down, and shoots himself. Hmm. And so that's a spoiler note, but that's my story. And all of those stories have really hit people hard. I think I've managed to make hit plays out of every one of them. Yeah. That means you sit forward. You want to know what's happening next. Like my daughter said, what's next, Daddy?
Yeah. I recommend, if folks haven't seen them, do check them out on Larry's YouTube channel or listen to them when they come out in audio form. I got to watch them on your channel, and I have to say, Hemingway, it felt like the most thematically and performatively different of the group of four. And it almost felt like it's so intense that yes, it's hard not to get yourself sucked into it. And it's hard for you not to feel these emotions as the viewer. I'm wondering what it's like for you, because again, we're looking at Larry's life as a whole here, and now here he is cast as Hemingway. How is it for you to separate yourself?
It was so hard, I could tell you, because he's entirely in his head. And the other three plays that I did, the people were talking to the audience because they had a reason to. And this guy, there's no audience. He's talking to himself, and he's reliving his entire life with Scott Fitzgerald and his agent and all of these people, and his ex-wives and so on. And it's 90 minutes of an interior monologue where you cannot contact the audience at all. And Lucy was in the audience a few times to help me out when I was just prepping it. And she said, "No, stop. You're looking at me like I'm supposed to know you're there." And so I had to absolutely work on that very, very hard to keep everything inside and live that stuff with Hemingway. Live the intense sadness. I end up calling him the man without a skin because of the things that he experienced, the way he experienced them. And then what he said about it, which is, I just want to write what's there, what's happened. And he's an American hero.
It is a very, very intense show, worth watching if you can. It's tough to watch at some points too, but I think that's the mark of a good piece of art, is if it's tough to take in, that means you're affecting someone very well.
Yes, Yeah.
Hey everybody, we'll get right back to the interview in 1 second, but I wanted to remind you all to check out Trek Untold over at Patreon. Patreon is the best way to directly support creators of things you like through a monthly subscription of an amount that you can choose. Trek Untold has a few different tiers already with different benefits, ranging from early access to episodes, the ability to ask a future guest questions, exclusive merchandise, and other bonuses that I'd love to offer, but first I need to grow that Patreon community to do that. Trek Untold has been around since mid-2020 and has grown a ton since then, thanks to listeners and viewers like you. Through a platform like Patreon, you can help me keep improving the quality of each episode and keep bringing you new interviews with folks that make the Star Trek universe what it is. If this community can grow more over on Patreon, I can offer new perks like watch parties, exclusive Trek Untold episodes, being able to directly interact with guests, and other things, but in order to do that, I need to know my audience wants these things. The best way to tell me what you want is by supporting us on Patreon, so please, check us out at patreon.com/TrekUntold today and become a bigger part of the Trek Untold family. And now, back to the interview.
You made a lot of risky choices throughout your career on stage, and I think this now leads us to The Boys in the Band, which
Yes.
I will admit to you, Larry, I never watched it until we did this interview. I had heard about it, but I never watched it until we were doing this interview, and I read the book, and I was like, okay, I need to finally actually do this. I just actually watched it very recently, and wow, like... Okay, again, you keep in mind when this was made, this is like, Star Trek had only just come out when The Boys in the Band was first off Broadway and then on Broadway. This is, the movie's 1970 or shot in 69, whatever it was.
1967 was
67.
when, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, again, we're talking about a very different era. And
Yes.
it's wild how much it still fits today in 2024 when we're doing this interview. How all of that still fits. And it's like the only thing that's changed is the clothing. But I want to ask you, when you took this role, I mean, you talk about this in the book, but were you worried that this could have been career suicide for you? And you did ultimately lose an advertising deal because of it, but were you worried about taking on this role and being like, this might be a great role for me, but this might be the end of the road for me too?
Mark Crowley and I met at Catholic University. He was an undergraduate. I was a graduate student. And he was from Mississippi. I'm from Arkansas. So we had that in common. And he was also the one guy that hung out in the lab theater on the Catholic U campus. There were two theaters. There was the main theater, and the people that worked in the main theater doing their acting jobs were known to be the Broadway people. They were going to go to New York and make it. And most of them did, actually, including me eventually. But I liked the lab theater because I've always been an amateur at heart. My financial guy, who I have to call now, he's 99 years old. He always said to me, "You really work? You like to work? Or you prefer to work for free, wouldn't you?" And I said, "Yes. The amateur spirit has been my guide all my life. By that I mean the love of it is more important than the money or the billing or all that crap that I fell for when I went to Hollywood, but not for too long."
Were you like worried about taking this role on for The Boys in the Band and just having this be like the last thing you ever did because it was so controversial?
Yes, of course, my agent, who also represented the play, she represented Mart, told me right after I told her that I'm going to do the play. She said, "Well, okay, that's your business. You're probably going to end your career here." And I was just beginning to make it in New York City. And but Mart was my friend. He was my friend. And that was why I did it. And still to this day, he's gone, but he's still my friend.
You did this play for 3 years, essentially, between the actual play and the movie. That was 3 years of your life where you were just Hank.
Yes.
Again, how do you, number one, stay in that character for 3 years and not go crazy? I mean, yeah, how do you just do that and be able to handle that for 3 straight years? And what did you learn about yourself during that 3 years?
Actors have this thing. They go out for dinner afterwards and go home and go to sleep and get ready for the matinee. They don't think about the play in between. Eventually, when you're preparing, that's when you're having the most difficult time to try to get the character right. And that's shortened up in Broadway now because it's like 2-3 weeks. Then you're supposed to have the character and everything else, plus the dance steps, plus the songs, plus that, and it makes a high adrenaline on your makes your adrenal glands go, what are you doing? You're back again, and so once you get the character down, though, and you know who you are, and you know who your buddies are in the play, it never becomes a routine. Never, ever. I used to look at actors who said, "Oh my God, we got a matinee again." I said, "No, it's another chance. We got another chance. We got 8 shows this week. Let's do it, everyone." And I've never lost that spirit, and I will never lose it because that's the only way I can work. To your point about staying in the character and what does that do to you? No, you don't do that because it's that would be counterproductive. You let the thing go, and the interesting thing is each audience is different. So that's the key thing. Each audience is different. The New York audience is just eat it up, and we ate it up too. We loved every audience in New York. We went to London, and the London people said, "Oh yeah, we've solved that problem of gayness. You people are just really funny jokers," and they laughed at everything. In New York, they took it seriously, and every place else that there was, L.A. and so on.
The crux of Hank's character is with his partner Larry, not you, but the Larry of the play, and that's where they're playing the telephone game in the last half of the show. And again, I just have seen this for the first time. I thought that was such a powerful scene entirely, the whole thing, the whole second act, I guess we'll call it. But that phone call with your scene partner who played Larry, I'd love to hear just about doing that scene, because again, we're talking about this is 1967 to 1970, very controversial time in America to be playing this, and here is you telling another man, you're playing a homosexual man, telling another man you love that person romantically and involved with all your heart and soul. It's one thing to act, but you still have to feel this and make it believable. So what did you do to find a way to make this love feel believable to you?
I didn't know much about love then. Actually, I thought I did. I was married and had 2 children, like Hank.
And this was to folks who know, this was to Robin Strasser, your first wife,
right? And I thought I loved her. It came to be that I understood love differently eventually in a real way, but I think what I did was to use Mart, my friend, as my effective memory. Mart's friendship for me, Mart actually was, I have to say it, he was in love with me. And I couldn't respond in the way that he wanted. And I knew this. And that's why our friendship lasted so long. And why in the book, as you know, there's this relationship between the two of us. It's no matter what happens, it's all going to be okay. And so I think I used that in the play that Larry was telling me that he didn't want that relationship anymore. He wanted a threesome. And I'm a guy that was faithful to his wife and 2 kids. And now I'm with this guy. And what? And the gay scene at that point, it was wild. It was so wild in New York City. Now, you know about all that, or you've heard about it. The places, the orgies and the Ansonia.
I had to look them up when I was watching the movie. I was like, Plato's Retreat, what's that? Like, I had to do some homework while I was watching it.
Yeah. It's like a roadmap.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it was easy to do that scene, and then when we got into the movie, of course, there was the issue of the kiss, and suddenly there was no kiss in the play for 3 years, and the play ran 1,000 performances, and people loved it. They ate it up. Suddenly in the movie comes the word from Cinema Center in Hollywood that Yeah, they have to kiss. They go upstairs and they kiss. And both Keith Prentice and I, who was playing Larry, disagreed with that. And of course, Billy Friedkin was under the pressure of the bosses, the producers, and so on. And he said, "Well, when I read the play and saw the play, I would agree that there should have been no kiss. But now I've changed my mind.
Really? What changed?
I think there should be." Keith and I said, "No, we're not doing it." And so I said, "You can take us to SAG, Screen Actors Guild. You can do all that stuff." And boy, that scared the shit out of them because they didn't want to be involved with Screen Actors Guild and all the problems that would entail. And so eventually they agreed not to do a kiss, but to do what we were going to improvise for them. And we ended up improvising a scene that, when in the dailies were shown the following day, knocked everybody's socks off. They were crying, sniffling, and at the end of it, Billy said, "Well, I think actually we won't use that scene at all. We'll just go to black." And Mart said the same thing, and I called him a schmuck, And that was the end of that problem. But when the revival came in, and Joe Mantello, who is the best director we've got right now, directed this play, and I was told I had to go and see it and show up. And I said, "No, I can't. I don't like this brouhaha, the red carpet. I'm in Palm Springs. I don't want to go anywhere." And David Zippel, who was a lyricist, a Broadway lyricist, was standing next to me in the kitchen. And he said, "You have to go." And I said, "Why?" He said, "For the guys. They were all dead. They all died of AIDS. I'm the last one standing. Nobody else is alive now." So I went, and Lucy and I went together, and I watched the revival, and there was a kiss, but it was so extremely well done with such, I wouldn't even call it taste. I'm going to call it discretion. And as Matt Bomer, who played Keith's part, Larry, started to take his T-shirt off, the lights went down very nicely. And I have complimented Joe on that many times. And I thought it was a good solution to it because it made it simple. But there was one thing missing from the revival that was ever present in the first production, and that was the closet. The people in the closet behaved with fear and extravagance and craziness because they were locked in there. And they couldn't get out because if they did, they'd lose their jobs, or some of them. In my case, in my knowledge, in Arkansas, you might have been killed if you were gay. And so these days, it's still possible to be killed in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Texas, if you're gay, and also in New York. But it's infrequent. And there's a change. There's been a change and an acceptance. And the acceptance is part of what's on the table right now in our dystopian situation here in this country. Who's going to be accepted? Who's going to be a real American, and who's can't be because they're gay or because they're brown or because they're Muslim, And so to me, it was a matter of social justice.
It's interesting because, again, as we talk now, I'm like realizing, I get it now. Like the apartment was the closet, and this is the place where they are comfortable. And the minute they leave that building, then now they have to play the part of whoever they're going to play outside.
That's correct.
But it's true. It speaks to a point of, here we are now. This is 50 plus years later. And it's funny in the film, the person, I forget his name, but the person who plays Alan, he's like saying, "Oh, you can do whatever you want. I just don't force it on us." That's the word he says, is don't force it on us. And here, 50 plus years later, you still hear that exact same argument. And it's wild.
Exactly right. And the guy who played my part, Tuck, somebody, forgotten his last name. Oh, Lucy says, Tuck Watkins has two adopted children. He's raising as a single man. He's an altogether admirable fellow. And when I said, there's no problem when he come out in Hollywood now, and he said, oh, yes, there is. I lost my first job after that. And I think he was a soap opera guy before that. So, but yeah, he is having a hard time. And he's a good actor and handsome guy. And what's the problem, you know? And some of the other guys that were already stars when that movie came out, and recently, I forget the dates of time, but they agreed with that, you know, that it's still difficult in some ways. So to change is to be better. To change is to be better, and we're having a hard time with that right now.
So, Larry, you know, on this show, I talk about a lot of things besides Star Trek, and one of those things is Murder, She Wrote. I'm a big Angela Lansbury fan, and you did Murder, She Wrote 4 separate occasions. Great episodes, all of them. And I just want to run down some of the names you worked with as guest stars in those episodes, because your episodes had John Astin, you had Tom Bosley, Lee Merriweather, Lee Purcell, a very young Neil Patrick Harris, John Rhys Davies, and then you had also, in your final appearance, 2 Star Trek alumni. You had Daphne Ashbrook and Casey Biggs, who worked in the newsroom with you in that last episode. But, you know, again, amazing cast, but I'd love to just first hear some stuff about Angela Lansbury, because she was a true tour de force, amazing woman. What are some memories you have of Angela Lansbury?
Well, first of all, the wonderfulness of her. She was warm. She was accepting. She was present at all times with you, and she also had her eye on the casting, and she liked to use stage actors a lot, but her eye was unerring. She chose good actors, and I always say I played a cop twice and a bandit or a bad guy twice, and I could have arrested myself.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. But I loved doing work with her because she was present on, you know, when you're working with some actors, they are not, particularly in movies, they show up, but they're not present. They say the lines, but they're not there. And they have shtick that they do. And that's why they're stars. And so you have to just deal with that. But Angela was a real actor. And so when you looked in her eyes, you better be there with your own self.
So, Larry, let's beam into our Star Trek discussion at last here. We're going to be talking about your time as Sybok in Star Trek V. And oddly enough, this does go back to something we talked about a little bit earlier here. And that's the story of how you initially got cast as Sybok. So can you tell us, how did you get cast as Sybok? And how does this relate to some of what we talked about a few moments earlier?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know it, but Bill had watched Lyndon on television on PBS in some hotel room where he was stuck for the night and had nothing better to do. And he watched Lyndon, and he asked for me. Now, that's rare, or maybe not so rare, I don't know, but I got the call to come in, and I didn't know from where it came exactly, and it was as usual, you know, and I drove up to Paramount Gate, and I was surprised that a golf cart came out to meet me, and they said, don't worry about parking, Mr. Luckinbill, we'll park your car for you. Please get on the golf cart and come with me. Oh, well, that's different. So I ride the golf cart to the bungalow, and wherever it is, it happened to be, I think, one of the Desilu stages. And I go in, and everybody stands up to greet me. That's rare. Oh, my goodness, what's this about? And shake hands all around and sit down. And they go right into the pitch that they're giving me. I'm not giving them a pitch, and I'm not reading a scene. They're not looking at me like, is he old? Is he too old? Is he too fat? Is he too tall? they're saying, "You're the guy." Oh my God! And then's when I found out that Bill had seen me and said, "This is the guy I want." And Harv Bennett wanted to be a little more circumspect about things and maybe find out if I wanted to do this and was I up for it. And so they sort of had a little chit-chat between the two of them about who was in charge. And of course, they were both in charge, the producer and the director. And I was told to take the script home, read it, and let us know if I wanted to do it. And I went home and read it and loved it. I loved Sybok. And I called them first thing in the morning, and bam, bam, I'm in the whole Star Trek thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about it. I hadn't followed it in television. I'm kind of I watch the news. I'm not somebody that's always on the right side of who should be, who's hot and who's not in television or in the movies. That's how it happened. And boy, to be in that, suddenly taken into that fold of people who care so much about this idea of going to space and encountering the troubles that we encounter or the surprises, the wonderful surprises, was such an eye opener to me, and it still is actually.
Yeah,
and the fact that they're bringing Sybok back, in some form, I'm glad they are.
Yeah, I want to actually ask you about that in a little bit. In fact, I'm happy you know about that. But I do want to ask, I was watching an interview on YouTube. This was an interview that you had done when Star Trek V was just about to be released. And it's from the Bobby Why Not archives on YouTube. And the interviewer was asking if you were scared to do a movie like Star Trek. And you said that you actually were a little bit trepidatious about doing it. So do you remember what had made you worried about taking on that part back then?
Well, first of all, it was sort of like a closed entity. Everybody knew everything about all the people and I didn't. So I had to bone up on that. And my trepidation was not fear. It was excitement, I think, because I thought that Sybok was the best villain, non-villain that could ever imagine in that series, because I did watch the series of movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not very impressed with the evil guys. And so here suddenly is a heroic fella who wants to take everyone's pain, who wants social justice in his own way, and then makes this big mistake of stealing the Enterprise and getting into trouble with all these troublesome people. And also maintaining the character of a half Vulcan, half human. That was interesting. And when I got the first ears put on, it was really like, whoa, this is.
Yeah, and tell me about that. Do you remember your first fitting to get your ears?
Absolutely. The makeup was by the sons of Jack Dawn, who was a legend in makeup in Hollywood. And I don't forget the guy that was doing me, but he was his name. He was an older guy. He was a younger guy of the Dawn family. And we had a good time together. We laughed and joked and all of this stuff. And he prepped the ears and put them on me, and he said, "How do you like that?" And I said, "I like it. It's great." And I said, and also I like that I have so much hair now. It was my beard, by the way.
And it was a very excellent beard. I wish I can get something that looks as good as that.
Yeah, but mine does not look that good anymore. I've tried. Now it's all white and crummy. But at that time in my life, it was perfect beard.
Yes, it was. So the character of Sybok is very interesting. And like you said, he's not really a villain. And I just, again, rewatched it for this interview, and I agree with that point. He's kind of, for his time, when Star Trek V came out, it's a very complex character because he's not a bad guy. He wants something that he thinks is for the betterment of the universe and for the galaxy, but he's doing a bad thing to make it happen. So
Correct.
For you, looking through the Rolodex of parts you've played, Shakespearean parts and other theatrical roles, Sybok, he's a very Shakespearean character. He's also a very biblical character. Who was he to you? What kind of parallels did you draw from your life and your different roles to make Sybok into who he was?
Bill wanted to know that too. He said, "I want to know what your impetus is for playing this part, and I want you to have lunch with me." And so lunch turned out to be standing in front of a juice bar with plastic cups.
There's worse liquid lunches to have.
Yeah, and that was fine. And he said, "Who do you see like him?" And I said, "Lenin." And he said, "John Lennon?" I said, "No, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, the Russian dictator." And he said, "Oh, wait a minute, why?" And I said, "Well, he starts out wanting to change and create equality in his nation, and he ends up a dictator. He ends up almost irrevocably doing bad things. And that's what happened to Sybok." And he said, okay, well, that's fine. Just don't tell anybody else because we're not doing a commie movie here." And that was okay. And that was funny. And he didn't mean it funny, but so Bill was under enormous pressure in the making this movie. It was his big shot. And Leonard had actually wanted to play both parts, and I was told, I don't know if it's true. So Bill put the kibosh on that. He wanted a separate actor to do it, and so it turned out to be me, and I had such a good experience with it. Everything about it turned out to be good for me, and I was good for it too. I think I loved being there. I loved trying to make Sybok deal with his own pacifism in terms of the weapons and all of that and the fighting and all that stuff, because that's not what he was there for. He was there to save people, And we're going serendipitously on Friday. We're going to Vegas for the convention, and it's because it's the 35th anniversary of this movie, and I'm going to be a part of that, a panel discussion, and then I'm going to sell my book the following day in the convention hall. It's really a gem-like ending for this thing, and I would say my last 3 seconds of fame.
Hardly, not at all. But it is amazing just how enduring this whole franchise is, and that you get to be a part of it. I do want to backtrack for a moment to talk a little more about William Shatner, talk about Mr. Shatner, because in the book you mentioned the most time you spent with him was that casting meeting, and then the first scene you did with him with you riding your horse in the beginning of the film, which ultimately he ended up redoing himself. But what was he like as a director? We hear a lot about him as an acting partner, and the stories vary. Sometimes they're good experiences, sometimes they're bad experiences. But how was he as a director?
I have looked at internet criticisms of Bill and the movie, and they're so trashy, they're so bad, they're so ugly. I can't believe it. The movie's a very good movie. I'm sorry, it breaks into 2 pieces with the guys on trying to get down El Capitan, and then at the end singing "Row, row, row your boat merrily down the stream." I think that's a very tender script, and it's very, very because what that says to me is that group that lived in the Enterprise survived, and they survived for a long time. Sybok, at the end, reaches out to his brother, and the brother responds. So brother to brother, that's the last thing Sybok ever does. And then he sacrifices himself to this insane God that he's made up in his mind. Hey, I think that's the story of life. Many people sacrifice themselves to insane gods. And Sybok did the same thing, but to save his brothers.
I think Star Trek 5 has aged a lot better than people think. Again, having rewatched it, it's, people might say it's not one of the better ones of the many, many movies, but I think it's better than people think it is.
I do too. I couldn't agree more. And I'm not just because I'm in it, but I was really terrific in it. So,
you might be a little biased, but you're allowed to be.
a little bit, yeah.
Do you remember what the reception was for the film back when it first came out?
I do not. I never do look at reviews and receptions like that, because the work is the work. And if I think it's good, and I did, I'm happy.
I think there's a lot of really good moments in the film. There are some that might be a little bit weird, like Uhura doing her feather dance. That's a different conversation.
Yes, but, it is. Yeah.
I think one of the scenes that really stands out to me is the one that you had with DeForest Kelley. And that's where Sybok is sharing the pain of Dr. McCoy. I think that's one of DeForest's best dramatic moments in the entire series. And you two did it together. It's a beautiful moment.
It is. And DeForest was my best friend on that set. We're both Southern boys. There's something about being a Southern boy that you know things that people don't know, and you accept things, and you know the acceptance is not a good thing. But DeForest and I, we never got to be, like long conversations or something. But I'm very sorry about that, because I know that he died soon after that, and I respected him enormously. The way he had come to Hollywood, which was the way I was supposed to come to Hollywood, by review studios wanting to make me a cowboy star. But with DeForest, that would have worked. With me, it didn't. And DeForest had lived those passages in Hollywood and come out of it an actually really good actor who was present in the moments that he had to be present. And those are the things that really count in movies. So when we did that scene together, he was so empathetic, and I felt so much like I had to save him. And that was so apparent, I think. DeForest said something to me that, I don't know, I've said this before, but it still ducks me for a feather, which is, he said, "You're going to get an Academy Award someday. You're that kind of actor." I had never even dreamed of such a thing, but he said it to me. And boy, that hit me hard. I didn't reach that goal, but I'm not sorry about that either, because I stepped away from movies and went back to the theater. And that's when I got the one-man shows, and that became my life for 35 years. If there's an arc to my life, it's that. It's that somebody who wakes up in the Ozarks and looks up and says, there's got to be something better than this in life, and ends up with those four men who let me stand in their shoes for 35 years and tell the American story of democracy, and of the need to be better, the need to make a more perfect union. That became my, I don't know. I can't even put it into words.
Modus operandi, maybe?
I think, yes, modus operandi. No, bigger than that. Yeah, it's somewhere in the book, I think I say it. In the coda I wrote for the four guys, saying that they made a man out of me.
The interesting thing I want to talk about with Sybok is his power, let's just call it. And he says the line, "Each of us hides a secret pain. Share it with me and gain strength from the sharing." And that's such a powerful thing to say. Not even just the actual act of it, but just the power of it. So for you playing the part of Sybok who's doing this, what did that mean to you?
It actually gave me power. It actually filled me with power. Because if you accept that, you do have power. I'm a father of 5, and I'm in love with the same woman for 45 years. That's the power that I think that they were talking about. It's the power of love, pure love, giving love, not taking love, not lust, not attachment, but real love, which is you would lay down your life for your partner, and your children. And I just saw something yesterday about this guy, this first responder who ran a mile and a half toward the big fire here in California because there were 4 dogs that were stuck. And he had stopped the car, get out. He ran back, went into the fire, and picked up I guess it was the male dog and 3 of the little dogs, and somehow got them to follow him. And they ran back and they got into the helicopter and were able to escape that fire. I thought, that's for dogs. Here's a guy who's proving his love for humanity by separating himself from security and safety and going into a fire, just like the people at 9/11 who went up the stairs. But anyway, I live in emotions. I also try to have common sense once in a while, which is not mutually exclusive.
And we should add too, we haven't really talked a ton yet about Leonard Nimoy, and I do want to talk about him before we move on, because again, he is your brother, and he plays your brother in Star Trek V. What memories do you recall of working with Leonard Nimoy on and off set?
Leonard on set was remote because he was working as Spock. I understood that. Spock is remote from human contact. And afterwards, we became friends. After the movie was over, we went to Leonard's house a few times, had dinner. It was wonderful. I was very sad when he went because he was such a good actor. People don't know this. Outside of Star Trek, he did some great stuff. He was one of the guys that was present, you know?
Yeah, we had his son Adam Nimoy on in the show a little while ago, and we talked about some of his other work. So yeah, I mean the catalog of things, the resume that Leonard Nimoy had, so much of it people don't know about, and it was really good stuff.
It was.
Yeah, and he was a character actor. You know, he did what he had to do. He did all sorts of random jobs. He was one day a Westerner, next day he was a serial killer on a Hitchcock show or something. So he's done it all.
I know. Because with that face, you had to do everything.
And he was a great artist as well. I mean, I'm sure you probably knew about his photography and his poetry. Did you guys ever discuss arts and performing beyond just the scope of Trek and that world?
Yeah.
Was that something like that you guys talked about offset?
No, I'm sorry we didn't. But I especially like to talk to DeForest and George Takei, who thought I was funny. I could make him laugh. And Bill had to stop us once. We were laughing off set, and he was trying to shoot a scene. He almost threw us off.
Larry, being the giant Star Trek nerd that I am, I also collect lots of Star Trek things, and I'm an action figure collector. And Star Trek V gave us the only Larry Luckinbill action figure. Are you aware of that?
No, I had one and somebody stole it.
Oh, you got to get you another one. What did you think about that figure? Did you like it? Did you think it looked like you?
I liked it. Well, who knows? I liked it. It was short. It was very short.
It was one of those Galoob unarticulated figures, so you didn't really move much, but it was you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I would love to have that back, but I didn't know how to do it. I suppose I'm not a collector, but that one I would collect. You know, my kids really like Star Trek, and I'm glad they're coming with us on this trip up there. They'll get a taste of what the Treksters are. Yeah. Trek Untold. I hope we've told a lot of the things that were untold.
We certainly have. We've dug deep here. And just one last Star Trek thing, really, because you mentioned in your memoirs, in your book, there's only 2 movies that you will watch that you did. And we talked about both of them today. It was The Boys in the Band and Star Trek V. Yes. What is it about those 2 movies that you're able to actually watch them as opposed to anything else you've done?
Because simply I was there I was present. I was actually thinking on camera, actually thinking the thoughts of the character on camera. And those are the ones that you treasure, because that's when you know you've accomplished your task. The others, sometimes you're trying to do something, you want it to look this way or that, but you're not really, you're pretending to think, but you don't think. And sometimes you can get away with it, but most of the time, if it's a close-up, you cannot get away with it. The camera knows when you're not thinking. It just does. I mean, especially for an actor. Sometimes for the rest of us, people who aren't actors, they don't see that. But actors are very self-critical. Both Lucy and I are. And when we watch stuff, we see what people are doing. Those movies, I was present. And I guess they were closest to me in some way.
All right, so Larry, that wraps up Star Trek, but I got now the lightning round for you here. So let's see what we can pull out of you here. These are the hardest questions I'm going to probably ask you today. So first thing I want to know, best day on the job you ever had, and that's any job, and then worst day on the job you ever had.
I think the best day was when I did the scene with Bill Shatner where he challenged me to be mad. You were mad? And I said, am I? Let's see. And the worst day, when I was not enjoying, I was overweight and not enjoying myself, and I think I had a tantrum.
Looking through your entire career, what would you say was the most challenging role that you did that became the one you're most proud of?
Lyndon.
Yeah. What was so challenging about that to make you then love it so much?
Well, everything was challenging about that. 6'5" president with that face, and I had to really work my way into that character, and I did it. And it was very successful. And I was surprised, but I was nominated for an Emmy, didn't win, but it was that kind of thing.
What's something that you know today that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Oh, how to love. How to really love.
What would you say is the most important piece of advice somebody ever gave you that you still think about and use today?
When I was going through a divorce, the producer of Chapter 2 of Neil Simon's play that I was doing on Broadway, Manny Eisenberg, the producer, had also just gone through a divorce. And he knew that I was having a really hard time with it. He came up to the dressing room and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You've got to forgive yourself the 49%. Well, that really started me on a train of trying to forgive myself. And that because I wasn't forgiving myself. 49%.
Yeah.
And Manny is a really good friend still today.
So we talked today a lot about your autobiography, and folks can read it if they want to get all the full details about your amazing life. But looking back on everything, what do you want the legacy to be of Laurence Luckinbill?
The book.
The book
Effective
itself.
Memory. Yeah. Yeah, and my long marriage.
Yeah. And last question for you
Our
today.
long marriage, yeah. I mean, we put up with each other beautifully for quite a while. Yeah, but the book is it. And Lucy said the other day, I was going on about something, and she said, "You've done the book, you've done your work." So that's important. And now my kids are reading it, and most of them are when they see it, the audio, which comes out in about 2 weeks.
And last question for today, Larry. What's the best part about being a piece of the Star Trek universe?
I think these interviews, and this is one of them, really, this is a fantastic interview. I love talking about it. And it reminds me of some of the wonderful things that have happened for me. And I get to recount them. And I love that and this moment we're having right now.
Well, I love this moment too. I was honestly quite nervous to come in today and talk to you because there's so much to discuss, so much to dive into. But really, this has been a treat. This has been amazing. Your book is wonderful, and I wish you the most success with it. And, last thing I just want to say to you is, that kid from the Ozarks, he became Captain Marvel. He became a noble man doing noble things. And Thank goodness we've got you in the Star Trek universe, because you're amazing, Larry.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. Live long and prosper.
Yes, live long and prosper. Another 90 years for you, Larry.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this week's episode of Trek Untold. Don't forget to follow us on social media, whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, all at Trek Untold. If you caught this episode on YouTube, please remember to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment to let me know what you think about this week's guest and the stories that they told. And if you're listening to it on any of the different audio platforms out there, please leave a rating and a review to make sure more folks can find this podcast. If you're in a position to financially support this show, please consider visiting patreon.com/TrekUntold. For as little as $1 a month, you can gain access to all sorts of perks, including early access to episodes and the ability to ask questions to my guests as part of these interviews, and be part of the Trek Untold community. Check out my show notes for all the different links to all of these things, as well as a few other things, including my Amazon storefront and places to pick up Trek Untold merchandise. And once again, thank you for watching this week's episode. There's many Star Trek podcasts out there, but we appreciate you choosing this one to enjoy today. Until next time, I'm Matthew. This has been Trek Untold, and until the next time, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars, is powered by the Rageworks Podcast Network and affiliated with Nerd News Today.